Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Happy Friday to each and every one of you. Just wanted to make a real quick announcement, and well, actually two announcements. The first one is, if you haven't checked us out already, besides on the YouTube channel, we do have a consulting company called Prestige Weather, which is named after this very channel, where we do one-on-one weather consultations exclusively about your local area once a week at only $5 a month. And by the way, that is not the only benefit. You also get daily and weekly updates through our Discord platform. A lot of our services are disseminated on there, along with a whole bunch of different features that you can get. Again, at only $5 a month. So if you want more information on that and you want to get signed up, head on over to prestigeweather.com. Link is going to be in the description down below. And that is announcement number one. Announcement number two, I have thought about this, and I think what we're going to start doing on this channel is I want to incorporate some more live streams. So if you have any feedback for me on what type of content you want to see on those live streams, post that down in the comments below. I want this channel to, not just be about providing you that free weather content that I know I'm not the only one providing on the YouTube platform. I also want this to be a place where you guys have a little bit more say as far as what's coming out with content. For example, I'm sure some of you might want me to cover more about the Great Lakes, right? The Great Lakes with lake effect snow, what the lake effect snow outlook could be for this upcoming winter season. Maybe you guys are out in the Rockies, who we've kind of touched on over the last week. With some of the activity going on there. We're actually seeing some snowfall across Wyoming and the northern Rockies tonight. If you want us to cover more of some of those areas, or just different topics in meteorology that we can discuss, again, post those in the comments down below, and I'd be happy to take that feedback and run with it. But that all said, let's get right into today's video. The focus for today is really just a quick little summary, a whip around of the country and what we're looking at right now and what we can expect going into this weekend. Not going to be anything too crazy tonight, guys. I am planning some a little bit more elaborate videos over the next couple of days that may or may not be pertaining to Thanksgiving forecasting. Might have just given you a little bit of a hint there. But tonight's just going to be a little bit of a quick whip around. I got in late. Usually I like to do these videos a lot earlier. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of jump right into it, do a quick little whip around of the United States. And as I said, we'll then divulge into what I expect to see going at least into the weekend and into early next week. Let's begin first with some of the major storylines across the country. And we're going to start first with the Gulf Coast. I mean, my gosh, it seems like it's been forever since we've talked about you guys. You've been experiencing some pretty significant drought across New Orleans, getting back towards eastern Texas. Now, the thing with that is you guys are still dealing with that drought, but we are seeing some more robust shower activity, which we haven't really seen all that much up until the last few weeks. We're seeing a lot of heavier rainfall just off the coast of New Orleans and even off the coast of near Houston and Galveston. That's going to continue to move off to the northeast tonight. We're going to be seeing that continuous shower activity, especially over the next couple of days. We are also anticipating a secondary wave to come off of the Gulf, particularly early next week, that also could bring some additional rainfall into the region. For you folks that have been dealing with this drought over the course of the summer and fall, my anticipation, as well as my business partner's anticipation, is that we're going to start to see more of a Pacific jet amplification as we get into December and January, to where we really start to see that Pacific flow crank in. And that's going to allow for more consistent, higher frequency rainfall events. And that would pretty much be on par with a lot of these areas climatologically speaking. Typically, December, January, and February, we're talking more about the bulk of our rainfall for the season in a lot of these areas. So that would certainly live up to the expectation from a climatological point of view, but also El Nino as well. And we've actually started to see that over the last few weeks, because as it stands right now, we've had this fluctuation in this jet pattern that I drew here, this ridge, trough, ridge, and then maybe some days it's a trough, ridge, trough. This week we had more of a split flow with our polar jet coming out of the north. And then we had our Pacific jet coupling out of the southwest and providing that jet amplification aloft to where we saw that wintry precipitation across New England and upstate New York. So, good news for you guys in the south. It's a storyline to watch. This rainfall tonight and the rainfall that we see going into early next week, this is certainly not going to cure the drought overnight. It is going to take a period of time. And to be honest with you, if all goes well, I would expect that the drought would be almost eradicated by the time we get to February and March. But that's really going to be contingent on El Nino showing its true colors and providing that Pacific jet amplification through the south and hence just higher frequency of rainfall events. We touched on it just now. For our friends in the Northeast New England, some quieter conditions. If we actually take a look here and go a little bit more zoomed in tonight, you can see some lake effect shower activity excuse me, across upstate New York, getting back towards Syracuse. Buffalo, you're not really seeing much of this. You did have some blow-off shower activity, but for the most part, some rather precipitous activity in some of these regions. You got some backed westerly flow that's moving over these lakes, and when you have that temperature difference, cold air aloft, and then warmer waters, that's going to create an unstable lapse rate and thus create some precipitation. Now, as far as snowfall is concerned, if we take a look here at our station plots, you can see that our temperatures are above freezing at the ground level. That's not to say that we aren't seeing some dendritic growth above the surface. When it comes down to what we're seeing at ground level, we're just not seeing that. We're seeing more rainfall activity, and that's the case here with temperatures currently this evening sitting in the low to mid 40s across much of New York. Meanwhile, back towards our higher elevations of Vermont and New Hampshire, seeing a little bit of a contrast there depending on where you're at. Higher elevations, you're talking about temperatures in the 20s to the teens in some locations. Meanwhile, though, in some of the lower elevations, seeing temperatures still hovering around the high 30s to low 40s. If we actually go back to the rest of the country, there's one more area that I wanted to cover. We really can't forget about it, and that is the Pacific Northwest. Let's actually put up our 500 millibar RAP analysis. You can't see it on this map, but I think you're going to see it on some of our forecast models. Excuse me. Is that we do have a really strong low pressure system just off the coast here of Portland and as well as Seattle, Tacoma, and that's bringing some consistent precipitation across the region. And hey, if you're in some of the higher elevations, we could be talking about some significant snowfall, in upwards of north of a foot and higher, depending on where you're at with elevation, especially above 5,000 feet. And that's going to be the case here for the next couple of days as this westerly flow continues to advect Pacific moisture upslope on some of our higher elevations and produce some snowfall, as well as rain in our lower elevations of the Pacific Northwest. So that's going to be a very precipitous time for you guys. And as we mentioned at the top of the conversation, very precipitous for the Gulf of Mexico and those localities. And then finally, for the Midwest and lower Great Lakes, we do have a couple of vortmaxes, which is areas of localized vorticity, right? Unfortunately, though, we're not really seeing a lot in the way of a frontal boundary. Not much moisture advection. A lot of that's confined to the south. Very backed flow. So some relatively dry conditions tonight across this region and even the upper Midwest and the northern plains. Going to be some colder temperatures tonight. Expect those lows to get down into the 20s and teens for a lot of these areas. We saw temperatures this afternoon in the 40s, and that's going to continue to warm into the weekend. But keep in mind, those low temperatures will still be hovering around the freezing mark during that span and be rather chilly for the most part during that time. All right, that all in mind, now that we've sort of set the scene for you, let's take a look finally at our weather models, at least just for the weekend, to see what we're going to be dealing with here. And as you can see, take a look here at the GFS 18Z. This is, of course, our temperature map. Before we even look at our temperatures, guys, we're going to just look at the 500 millibar jet here. And keep in mind, here is that coupled jet, your Pacific jet coupling with your polar jet. It's creating a really strong jet maxima, the same one that brought that really robust warm front across New England and the Northeast. That has now moved offshore, and we're dealing with some relatively dry conditions, with the exceptions, as we mentioned, of the eastern Great Lakes. We are seeing some lake effect rain showers this evening. As we go into the rest of the weekend, you see that system that we talked about in the Pacific Northwest moving onshore, much stronger winds aloft. There's our 540 line that we look for with the freezing aloft. That's a good indicator that any precipitation to the north of that is going to be snow. Anything to the south of that is likely to be some sort of wintry mix and or rainfall. Keep in mind, though, at higher elevations, we are colder with height, so we're likely going to be seeing some snowfall in some of those regions. We'll take a look at some of the snowfall maps here in just a moment. But once we get to the beginning of next week, look at that, ladies and gentlemen. We once again have an area of high pressure, I should say a ridge, that builds across much of the central United States. And this should not be a surprise to any of you or no shock. I mean, we're in a meridional pattern, which means we're going to see a lot of these temperature fluctuations as we begin to transition into December, January, February, really the heart of winter. It is El Nino. The pattern itself, I would personally argue subjectively that El Nino leads to sort of this erratic jet pattern in a transitionary period like we're in. And so we're going to be seeing, once again, above average temperatures for a large swath of the country, below average temperatures for the northeast New England. Since you're on the heels of that ridge, you got more of a troughing pattern here, bringing down some of that colder air. Could see some below to even well below average temperatures to start out your week going into Monday and Tuesday. Meanwhile, though, if you're in the Gulf Coast, you might be seeing this ridge and it might scare the crap out of you thinking you're not going to get rain. Not so fast. You actually have a cutoff system, and this is in association with that tropical wave that moves off the Pacific through the continental portions of Mexico and then back out the other side. And that should be enough to produce some precipitation once again. Keep in mind, we also have this area of high pressure out in the Caribbean that's going to advect that moisture. You're likely going to have some sort of warm front, cold front regime, and thus enough forcing to work with to bring, once again, some much-needed rainfall for New Orleans, Alabama, and places like Mobile and Mississippi. And going into the rest of the week, you see that ridge really expanding as well. A deepening trough, though, off the coast of Los Angeles and the western parts of California. This is a system that a lot of folks in the meteorology world have been talking about as a potential severe weather maker, maybe down the line. It's still too far to say. We'll have to keep an eye on it. This is just one GFS run, but the ensembles are also picking up on this kind of solution. So it's something to watch. Pretty dynamic system yet again, but this time could be in the form of severe weather for the central part of the country. We'll have to watch that space going into next week. Let's take a look at two maps here before we call it a day, and I think I would really like to summarize the temperature change here with you guys. Again, just looking at the GFS for now, but as you can see, cold below average temperatures for the Northeast and New England, but once we get into the beginning of next week, there is that warm air building across the central United States. Meanwhile, New England staying below average, and even some parts of the Pacific Northwest that had saw rain over those last few days and leading up to Monday will also be below average with their temperatures. Also, Texas, relatively below average as well. A lot of that likely to do with that system moving through that little shortwave feature. It's going to bring in some rainfall. And then as we go into the middle of the week, you see that warm air really expanding once again across the central United States. Well above average temperatures you could be talking about for this time of year. Wouldn't be surprised, I know it's far out, but wouldn't be shocked based on the synoptic scale of that ridge to see some temperatures back into the 60s, if not well exceeding that. We'll also have to keep an eye on that going into next week. And finally, let's take a look at some of the snowfall totals that we could project here for the Pacific Northwest going into next week. That's a 3-1. That's sleet. That's what I thought. Let's continue to move on here, and there we go. Right there's that snowfall really beginning to build out near Washington. We'll actually zoom in for you guys here just to show you some of those totals. I don't want to get too far ahead on the time frame here, so we'll just really turn our attention to this weekend. And as you can see, the GFS picking up on a couple of feet of snow in some of the northern portions. I believe that's the Cascades out towards Washington, as well as even Mount St. Helen and Mount Olympus, or Olympia, I believe. I might be mixing up the name, and I apologize. But those two areas are expected to get quite a bit of snow We can also check, of course, the other models as well for confirmation. We could look at the NAM 3K and actually isolating a little bit better, resolving that better, and isolating it to specific peaks. And but still, right around the 20 to 30 inch snowfall totals, not degrees. 20 to 30 inch snowfall totals. May even exceed that locally in some of those higher elevations, depending on where you're at. But still, that's sort of the benchmark that we're seeing on some of these models. A lot of that having to do with the westerly flow and the strong low pressure system that's expected to move onshore by the time we get to this weekend. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do hope that you guys enjoyed the video today. Be sure to like, comment down below. Let's get some feedback about what you want on our upcoming live streams, what you would like for me to talk about, what you would like me to focus on, if you want me to do a winter weather outlook, if you want me to do a Thanksgiving outlook, etc., etc. I'm happy to cover whatever you guys want me to cover. Just post that down in the comments below. And with that being said, I hope each and every one of you have a great weekend. We'll be back here with another video tomorrow, and we'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.